We are going to focus on debt and debt management. Ultimately, debt is the key to taking control of your finances, really. What are the types of debt? So I think personally, the two major types of debt are good debt and bad debt. So good debt being debts against assets, and then bad debts, which are debts against non-assets or unsecured debt or credit cards. And I think those are the two major types of debt. So you listen to the average person and you want to pay off your house, you want to pay off the credit card and things like that. And that's all good and are well and good. But for good debt, I argue, why pay it off? Because again, the good debt, it's a debt at a very low interest rate. Usually, that's why it's considered a good debt because it gates an asset. And you could, if you have a company, you could probably write some of it off and things like that. But you can also leverage that debt. So what I'm saying is, if you own a house, this is a perfect example of good debt. So I have a house for, I'm just giving simple numbers, $100,000. We all know a house is going to be more than $100,000. But the point is, I have to put down 20%. So I got to put down $20,000. And then now I'm left with a mortgage of $80,000. That's $80,000 that I owe to the bank for the next 30 years. Sounds scary, but the interest rate is 3 or 4%. Okay, so $80,000, interest rate of 3 or 4%. Let's just do 3%, 4% for simplicity. So $80,000, 4%, and it's for a 25, 30-year term. Now, when you look at it, this is what you're going to see when they send you the document. They're going to show you what your current numbers are, what your current payments will be per month. So let's say, for example, it's 3, 2, let's do $1,200 a month or $1,000 a month. And they're going to show you that this is what you're going to have to pay every month. And usually every mortgage is always only for 5 years, max fixed. If you do a fixed term, 5 years. So this is what you're going to be paying for the next 5 years. Now, they're also going to show you the cost of borrowing. And this is what scares people. You got $80,000 that you got to pay back to the bank, but you're at a 4% interest rate. So the cost of borrowing, if assuming you pay this mortgage back in the 30 years, the cost of borrowing is actually probably going to be more than actually what you paid for the house. So for example, cost of borrowing may say, by the time you're done paying this off, you will have paid us $180,000. And that's what freaks people out. So think about it. If you have a line of credit for this house that you bought at $80,000, right? That's your mortgage, 80,000. But then the cost of borrowing, if you to finish this and bring this whole contract to term or completely pay this off in the next 30 years, $1,000, you're probably, the cost of borrowing is going to be more probably than the actual loan amount that you asked for the house. That's what's crazy. So it scares people. And this is why I think a lot of people, some people, might decide to rent because they're like, that's ridiculous. I could buy 2 houses with that. But here's the trick. More than likely, you're not going to pay it fully to term. Probably going to sell the house or whatever before 30 years. The other thing too is in that 30 years, you could offset your costs. You can maybe rent out a room and then now you're renting a room and then that person is helping you pay down this mortgage. So that's the thing about good debt. So once again, I argue when people don't like debt and they think mortgages are bad, and yeah, they suck, but the point of the matter is that if you do it properly, you can kind of leverage it. And the cool thing about the good debt is over those 30 years, every 5 years or every 6 or 7 years, you can pull equity out of that house. So again, let's go back to that scenario. You got an $80,000 mortgage. The house is valued at 100,000. You put 20,000 down as a deposit, $80,000 line of mortgage. But now, 5 years later, that house is now worth 200,000. What can you do now? You could refinance and you can now take equity out of the house. So now what's happening is there's two ways you can leverage that equity. You can either do it in a home equity line of credit. And so basically that's a line of credit that the bank gives you, but it's compounded monthly or annually. So it's compounded differently, the way the interest works. Again, I'm not an expert in finance. So it's a little bit more forgiving. And then also home equity line of credit is revolving, meaning that now you have this 80,000, but now because you have this house, it's built in equity, you can now maybe take $80,000, an additional $80,000 from the bank. The bank will give you in a HELOC, or they'll give you cash if you choose to roll it up into your mortgage, where now you have $80,000 at your disposal. And yes, it's going to be at a little higher interest rate, maybe 7%. But the point is, where once you had no money or a line of credit to use and invest with, now you now have $80,000 that's sitting in your bank account at a 7% interest rate, but it's revolving. So if you choose to do a renovation that costs 20,000, you now can take from that line of credit 20,000, do that renovation, invest in your home, continually add value to your home even more because you did that renovation. And then now when you pay back 20,000, you could just pay it back, and then now you have another you've reset your line of credit back to 80,000. So again, that's the good thing about good debt. Another thing that you could do with good debt is, let's say for example, you don't get approved for a HELOC. Then what they may do is they may just give you cash. They might just give you $80,000 cash because that is your equity that you're owed within your house that has gained value over the last several years. So now what you do is you have the 80,000, and you can now take that 80,000 because it's cash, and you can now just freely put it in whatever vehicle you want. So that would be a great opportunity to put that $80,000 into your investments. Assuming you don't have any bad debts. Obviously pay off your bad debts first if you have any, but if you don't, put the whole 80,000 into Wealthsimple or whatever investment account, and you can either do it managed or you can even break it up. Maybe 30,000 goes here, 20,000 goes here, 10,000 goes to crypto. Always put a little bit of money into crypto because it's very volatile. You don't want to put too much money into crypto. And that's amazing. So now you've now just jump started your whole investment portfolio. And the cool thing is that as long as your investments are greater than your interest on your mortgage, you're winning. Because again, this is the trick. Because you now got 80,000 cash from the bank, what that does is now your once $80,000 mortgage, it's now $160,000. That's the trick, right? Now, obviously, it's going to be less because over the 5 years or whatever, you have been paying down on that $80,000 principal. So probably you're at like $75,000 or $70,000. But the point is, when they give you the 80,000 in either a HELOC or cash, that's going to tack on to your mortgage if it's cash. And then if it's a HELOC, then now you're going to have an $80,000 line of credit. So again, it's just going to be adding to your debt service ratio, like your debts overall, right? So sometimes I actually recommend if you are in that position, which is a great position to be in, where you have equity coming towards you or owed to you by the banks, maybe consider putting it into your mortgage. Again, I hate it because your mortgage is going to grow bigger, but the fact is your mortgage is basically good debt, and it's free. It's not free money, but it's money at a very low interest rate. And that's the point. It's at a very low interest rate. So if you can get $80,000 and then put that into an investment that is giving you an 11 or 20% return per year, that is way better. So think of it. When you talk about debt, usually they say you talk to you listen to Dave Ramsey. He always talks about pay down your highest interest debts first. So if you have a car payment, 7%, if you can pay that off, you have this loan at 10%, pay that off first before the car payment, because that's a 10%. They're charging you 10% on the interest versus your car payment is 7%. So pay off the 10% first. Pay off small balances first. That's always good to do. But on the other side of it, on the flip side of it, with good debt, tack it on. If you can get money and then add it on to a debt that is at a 5% interest rate or 4% interest rate in this scenario, and then now you can take that cash and then put it towards a private equity that is 11, or stock market, which is 20%, or a bond, which is 6%, or crypto, which is sometimes 30%. Why not? You might as well do that, because now your money's working for you. Yes, your debt is going up higher, but you're using that money to invest in things that have high yield interest returns. So it's always good to do that. Sorry, I can talk about this forever, so I'm going off on a tangent. I'm not going off a tangent, but let's get to bad debt. So bad debt is credit cards. Bad debt is unsecured debt or unsecured money that you get. And again, I've told you my view on credit cards. I have a credit card now, but I'm more mature now. But the trick is I always just make sure that I pay the credit cards on time. I make sure I put in checks and balances where I get notifications of when it's a balance. What I do is, again, I don't know how credit cards work really. I do, but I keep it really simple. I always just pay the balance. Sometimes it'll be like minimum payment. I just pay the balance. Now, again, it's because I have the resources to do that. If you don't have the resources, I really urge you, if I urge you not to use credit cards, but if you are, pay the minimum. Make sure that your operating budget does not get compromised. If you got to pay the minimum. But for people that are not disciplined enough, I really urge you to, number one, not use credit cards at all. But if you do, just pay the full balance if possible. Because the minimum and paying the minimums can get away from you. Because sometimes people don't realize there's the pending transactions, and then there's the post dated transactions, and then the committed transactions. And sometimes it can get all confusing. At least it gets confusing for me with credit cards. So I just pay out the whole damn thing outright. Keep it really simple. And then my only other thing with respect to bad debt that I would be okay with, getting a line of credit. What I like about a line of credit, again, these are bad debts, but what I like about a line of credit is that you can't just use it for anything. Usually the banks will do a bit of a check, background check to see if you can qualify for it. They'll ask you what it's for. So it's a little bit more stringent, but obviously it's a better interest rate than credit cards. But also it forces you to manage your money. For example, if you have a line of credit, it's a revolving, which is always good. It means that you can use it, pay it off, use it, pay it off. But I like that it's just not so, you have to consciously leverage it. So it'll be zero, but then when you want to use it, you'll have to, how to use a line of credit. You would have to either write a check or transfer the money into your savings. What I'm saying is that it makes it harder. The effort to use a line of credit is more work than a credit card. Credit card is easy. You can just whip it out and tap it, and then boom, all of a sudden you racked up $3,000. You know what I mean? Which is painful. So a line of credit's not too bad. I don't mind them. But if you can get approved for it, because not everyone gets approved for it. One thing I also want to talk about is your credit score. It's one of those things is you gotta really watch out for your credit score. If you apply for too many credit cards, if your loan to debt ratio is too high. So basically, if what your utilization of the overall debt that you have, if your utilization is over 30%, that can hurt your credit score. It makes you look desperate to the banking or the financial institutions that are using more than 30% of all the credit that you have available to you. If that's really high, it affects you. So you want to keep that down to 25 or 20%, less than 20% ideally, and maintain your credit score. Try not to apply for too many cards too fast. Maybe apply to one or two. If you don't get approved, wait 6 months, apply again. Because if you keep applying, it's going to hit your credit score as well. One thing that you could do to leverage or combat that, get a really small credit card or use a really simple credit card, maybe at $1,000 limit or a $500 limit, and then never use more than 10% of it. Buy your groceries with it, maybe $100 you use on it, and then pay that off quickly. And that'll help grow your credit as well. But I always recommend you take a look at your credit score, see what's going on. Some of these credit companies and some of these institutions, they mess around. They make they make erroneous mistakes, and they can be hurting your credit because of what they're sending to the credit bureaus in terms of the debt that you have with them. Sometimes they make mistakes, they're human beings. So you got to really check it, make sure that your credit score is on point and no one's messing with you. So there's two major types of credit. There's a TransUnion and then there's Equifax. And back in the days, you had to pay for credit report, but now luckily this world is so simple now. You can use Clear Score, you can use Credit Karma, you can use Borrow. These are all ways that you can access your credit without affecting your credit score, and they're free. So definitely it's a great time to be alive with respect to checking your credit score. Again, years ago, you had to pay to see this stuff, or you'd have to request it via mail, and who's gonna wait for mail, right? Who's gonna wait for a report to come in 3 weeks later? The snail mail, right? So now it's instantaneous. So there's no excuse for you not to be aware of your credit score in this day and age, and hold it dear. The great thing about a credit score, a good credit score, is that you now are awarded the best rates. Because trust me, if you have a credit score of below 6 or 500, I guarantee you're not going to get the premium rate of on a car loan or the mortgage. You're going to get in the high risk interest rates, because what a bad credit score shows to the industry or the institutions is that you're a risk, and they don't want you as a risk. So they're going to jack up the interest rates to either hedge their risk of you or try to deter you and get you the hell out of their room, or not wanting to apply. Having a good credit score is always important. I was always pretty good, but I started up with like maybe 700 and then now I'm at like 850. I'm trying to get to 900. I did some recent movements. Again, some advanced stuff to literally remove all properties off my name and stuff like that. But again, we'll get into all that a little bit later. So suffice it to say, a credit score is very important, and try to hold on to it and listen to what the reports tell you. Always check multiple, check a credit report from TransUnion, check credit report from Equifax. Okay? So it's always important. But that's basically it. So basically, we talked about everything. We talked about snowballing method of paying off smaller debts first and then building momentum from that, paying off higher interest things first. We talked about debt avalanche, which is focus on paying off debts with the highest interest as well. And then consolidating debts, that's always important. If you have a lot of debts, try to consolidate, talk to the banking institution or third party lenders and see if they can consolidate if possible. That's always good, because again, the point is you want to reduce the amount of interest you're paying on these things. So you have multiple debts, one's 10%, one's 5%, 8%. If you total that up, that's how much you're paying in interest. If you can consolidate that, roll that all up into one big payment that's at maybe 11%, that's better. So you want to do that. And then you could always negotiate with creditors. Offer up, offer tips to, you can negotiate on lower interest rates or payment plans with creditors. Obviously, this is risky because they could do negative remarks on your credit score and hurt your credit score. It's the point of the matter is the creditors want you to pay them as much as you want to pay them. So as long as you guys are both on good terms, you're thinking along the same lines, they'll help you and they'll work with you. And ultimately, you want to assess your debts, look at the interest rates, look at the minimum payments, things like that. And you want to budget for debt repayment if that is the situation. Obviously, that's important. So again, part of the most important thing, your operating budget. If you have debts to pay off, you need to make sure you bake that into your operating budget so it doesn't become a burden and you're paying it off. And not just the minimum payments, ideally, the payments with interest, so you can actually start seeing a dent go down in your payments. So I think that's about it. Again, we focus on a lot of stuff here. Hopefully you found it fruitful. Again, have any comments, anything that I missed, please let me know. I really would love to hear more about what you guys have in store, what you guys are doing, and how you're doing it. And maybe I can learn a bit from you guys. All right, thanks. God bless.